Yes, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests. So, I was a bit wondering if I can fit to this well-distinguished society, well-distinguished group, for not being an expert in military affairs. I am mostly expert of history and also expert in foreign affairs. But I think in this roundtable there are such problems to discuss about that maybe I can make some small contribution to all of this. First of all, if we are speaking about NATO, I don't see any point that NATO will be really expanding to the east, or will risk expand to the east. So, for the time being, there are very nice words that NATO should accept Ukraine, NATO should accept Georgia, but if we look into the past, we can really understand that there is a definitely border, there is a very definite border between the spheres of interest of Russian Federation and of the NATO. And when we can remember the story of Georgia and this small local war, which was a real hot war between Russia and Georgia, the end of what Abkhazia and Southern Ossetia went in reality to the Russian sphere of interest. We understand that NATO, albeit it made its objections, but in reality not mixed into the affairs. We are supporting Georgia, we are helping Georgia, but nothing happened in a military way. Some US ships appeared in the Black Sea, like in this case in the Ukrainian events, but in reality NATO is very careful and takes steps in a very careful way. On the other hand, we can also understand that there is a very big lack of balance of power around Russia. So, if you look into the Caucasus, there is a long-standing conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Azerbaijan is being supported fully by the United States, not only against Armenia but also against Iran. And Georgia, over the time being, is also ally, would be ally of the United States, while Armenia is practically supported all the way by Russia and Iran. So you can see that there is a kind of lack of balance, or a very interesting situation. And so the newest events in Ukraine, I guess that Russia a little bit managed herself to a dead situation. For what you can do in the Caucasus, you not always can do in Eastern Europe. So Ukraine is very close to the heart of Europe. And if we consideration the Russian interest in the Black Sea and in the Crimea, we also should take into consideration the European and the Western interest in the integrity of Ukraine. And there is for the time being, there is no war between Russia and the Western world, of course. We are at peace and we are cooperating, but at least there is an economic war between the EU and Russia for the Southern Stream and any other economic problems. And Hungary, for the time being, is one of the biggest users of this economic Cold War. But I can say that Hungary's biggest interest to restore the normal circulation and the normal connections between EU and Russia. It's the first interest of Hungary. Also, it's also very important for the Hungarian point of view of security. So Hungary is a small country, a very open country. So Hungary's security also depends on the regional balance and Hungary's economic growth also depends on the regional balances. Hungary cannot carry on in a long-standing conflict. If we are speaking about NATO and Russia, NATO and Eastern Europe, of course, NATO should be reshaped, for it lost its original functions as a defense partnership for the North Atlantic region. It's much more moving to the east. But also NATO should understand that what the interest of Russia would be, and there should be a very clear balance of powers with the closing all these old conflicts, not only on the Crimea, or about the Crimea, and about Ukraine, where, as far as I can see, in Donetsk, the initiative is far not in the hand of the Russian Federation. It's a local initiative for the time being, but also the Caucasus. And then we can reshape NATO and reshape the NATO-Russian partnership, which is very important even for the future, as Russia is being the second military power, at least, maybe the first in Europe. So we should reshape all spheres of interest. We should make a new balance of power, which is for the time being lacking. And then we can speak about if NATO will move to the east, or if NATO can be moved to the east or not. Of course, traditionally and emotionally, Western Europe is accepting Georgia as an old partner. So we know that even back the Crusades time, Georgia was always accepted as a far member of the kind of European and Christian alliance. But if we want to help Georgia, at first we should try to make a new balance of power and then close all these conflicts in a hopefully wasteful way, so of a peaceful way. But I think that the eastern move of the NATO should be delayed and will be delayed for a time, for a very, not very short while. And I'm a little bit pessimistic in this situation. Of course, Your Excellency can have a more optimistic view. Okay, so this is what I wanted to tell to you, and thank you for your questions, and that's all.
Interesting, because you made some provocative questions as well. So actually I give the floor to the audience. If you have any question or remark, please don't be afraid. Who is the second?
I have no questions, but I would like to briefly comment the speech of His Excellency. And first of all, I would like to introduce myself, Russian Embassy, Mr. Timoshkin. Concerning your statements related to migration from Russia to Turkey, I would like to remind, first of all, I would like to remind our young audience, probably, which don't know some facts. The events of 2008 taken place during the Olympic Games, and first of all, what I would like to remind that the war began from that Georgian troops on the South Ossetian city of Tsinghua. Now it's not a Georgian city, but South Ossetian city. So, speaking about migration, it's a big question. Who was responsible for this aggression? Well, probably Mr. Saakashvili, the former president of Georgia. We don't know. I don't want to make responsible, and Russia is not going to make responsible Georgian people for this aggression. But nevertheless, this fact has taken place. Concerning the optimistic views related to the membership of Georgia and Ukraine in the European Union, well, we are not sure, quite not sure. Of course, we can believe in it, but nevertheless, we knew that official statements also from Berlin, from Paris, taking place. It's too early to wait European membership, Ukrainian membership, European Union, and NATO. Well, first of all, these countries have to lose their territorial conflicts and then to think about the prospects of integration. Well, probably I will add some more points, but it depends on the type of our discussion, framework of our roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We highly appreciate, because it is very interesting to know the Russian position. This is the other part of the conflict. So I think the history that we have a lot of tasks in the future to analyze what happened and how was it really. But you know, the history is history, and we will see, I think, in the future. Second question, if somebody has. So, ladies and gentlemen, you. I'm very happy to organize this roundtable meeting, and it's a great pleasure for me to welcome young people in this roundtable discussion. Allow me to introduce the participant of the roundtable conference. First of all, Mr. Golovkin, he is from Ukraine. His PhD in history, the crisis of modern Ukrainian historical science, problem of theory and historiography. Career. He worked in the research of the National Institute for Strategic Studies of the President of Ukraine. He is the director of the non-governmental organization Center for Political Analysis. He is senior researcher at the Institute of History of Ukraine of National Academy of Science of Ukraine. His research field is modernization in Ukraine. Attended many conferences abroad. The second young guy is Krzysztof Adasiewicz. He is from Poland. Studies National Defense University in Warsaw, Faculty of National Security, specialization Information Security. He received a bachelor degree on the topic Threats of Social Networks. From 2013 to present days, he is studying at National Defense University in Warsaw, National Security. From February to July 2014, he attended an Erasmus program at National University of Public Service in Hungary. Faculty of Military Science and Officer Training. From October to February 2015, he is participating in an Erasmus program at the University of Maribor, Faculty of Crime and Justice in Ljubljana. He participated in many conferences. The third one among the young is Krzysztof Vaszky. He studies at the Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest, Romanistic Studies, Portuguese Bachelor, National University of Public Service, International Relations. He as well participated in many conferences abroad and in Hungary as well. Dr. József Németh, he is a security expert. He works at the National Defense University, also National Public Service University, awarded the Bolyai János Research Fellowship at Hungarian Academy of Science. He is founding of Biztonság Political Security Policy Portal. His key area of research are continuous issues of transatlantic relations, the Hungarian security policy between 89 and 99, and the strategic communication. I think everybody was presented. Yeah? Mr. Dobrovich, I don't know the name because we did it earlier. So I prepared many topics to the roundtable discussion. I have to confess you that I sent to the participants so they know what about we will discuss. So the first question, and if you have some remarks or answer or other concerning the questions, I'm very happy to have it. So the first question, some years ago, the NATO emphasized the fight against terrorism and weapon of mass destruction. Later, the alliance elaborated a strategy against cyber threats. Now the NATO have tasked the work on hybrid warfare to be reviewed alongside the implementation of the Readiness Action Plan. What does it mean for the actual and future member states? What is your view about the future of NATO in the 21st century? This could be a general question. If you have some remark, I give you the microphone. Who is the first? Please. So, from left, and with that, right. Please.
So NATO has been, since the beginning, the organization which made us was collective defense. It was made to defend Europeans. This is like brief history of it. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, it has to change its tasks. But today the tasks of collective defense are returning. The threats which NATO was thinking reappeared. Our armies made changes, structural changes, which were focused on fighting terrorists, on abroad missions, not territorial defense. In the example of Poland, I can say that I'm not saying that reduction army was bad. I think that was a good move, but the buying of the equipment that we bought, the reorganization that we made was not focusing on defense, but on the missions in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Chad, and the other places where we were personally taking part of. Now we have woken up and we are thinking. We have not this defense, we have not this. We are buying new equipment from the United States, from UK, but we are buying amounts which are not enough. It's very funny when you see another news that Poland bought new missiles, but when you see amount, 20 missiles, that's nothing. So how NATO should look in the future? NATO should still be flexible, should respond to the threats that appear to the NATO countries. And what is the view of Poland of NATO? Poland's main aim of NATO is the defense of the members. So we should strengthen the ability and willingness of response of the threats. We should make a collective defense once again a main task of NATO. NATO should be still flexible, should still respond to the threats that appear to the countries. NATO should strengthen the eastern flank as the new threat of Russia appeared. And Poland strongly wants an automatical mechanism of collective defense. Thank you.
I'd like to thank CSDS for joining this roundtable. As we see, we need hires of power. Strategic landscape has changed. NATO has to face two challenges. There is no state and offensive policy of Russian leadership. NATO has to answer all of the challenges because NATO has to act in a global framework. Until 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, NATO ensured the unity of the West by defending against possible attack from the communist bloc and by supporting democratic principles against totalitarian ideologies. In the 1990s, for the first time, NATO engaged in military action, putting a halt to ethnic cleansing in the Balkans. The Cold War's end enabled the alliance to establish partnerships with former adversaries, including Russia, to admit new members and to establish relationships with partners across the globe, like in the Pacific. The turn of the century brought with it new and varied challenges for the alliance. NATO's defense preparations emphasize the massing of troops to deter or repel a cross-border attack, terrorism, proliferation of nuclear and other advanced weapons technologies, or cyber attacks. The actual two strikes is on a state and offensive policy of Russian leadership, urging NATO in strategic context a transformation. NATO should decide because in the European Union it remains the center of forum for decisions about defense and security policy. But what is the new mission? At their summit in Strasbourg, in April 2009, Alliance leaders directed Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen to convene a broadly based group of qualified experts to prepare the ground for a new NATO strategy concept. On 24th November 2009, presented its final report, which says NATO and the European Union remain the central pillars of stability and cooperation in the Euro-Atlantic region. However, Russia, because of its size and stature, will inevitably play a prominent role in shaping the Euro-Atlantic security environment. Unfortunately, reality is not as evident as we hoped. Leaders in Moscow have expressed concerns about past and prospective NATO enlargement, while allies have voiced concerns about possible attempts by Russia to engage in acts of political or economic intimidation. This combination of shared interests and strained feelings argues for a policy of active and constructive engagement both on NATO's part and Russia's. Some experts say Ukrainian crisis shows the new mission of NATO that means the end of post-Cold War and the appearance of a new enemy, Russia. I think it's a kind of propaganda because Russia could be a rival but not an enemy. Russia is a great entity with advanced capabilities and we must recognize its real position in the international system. We must promote the innovation of political dialogue with Russia. But the real enemy, I think, is Islamic State, because it's out of the international system. In my opinion, it's a rogue state that severely restricts human rights, sponsors terrorism, and seeks to proliferate weapons of mass destruction. My personal view is that NATO should focus on rebuilding the cohesion of the alliance and the relationship with global partners to get political dialogue wider. I studied international relations at National University of Public Service in Budapest, Hungary, which participates at Researchers' Night every year. This year, on 26th of September. It's a program in which research institutes, doctoral schools, and companies present their activities. Besides visiting the standard institutions, researchers can take part in various lectures and talent counseling, and they can learn about opportunities and techniques that can be helpful in self-management. Scientists are demonstrating their work, ranging from criminology to informatics, languages to psychology. The event is completely free, but booking is required for some activities. I participated at a conference where one of the speakers was Professor Colonel Karash Koshnikachi, former faculty advisor of NATO Defense College in Rome, Italy. Mrs. Sipos emphasized the importance of NATO partnership in global dimension, and if I'm not mistaken, she was right. From my point of view, global partnership will make more successful the Euro-Atlantic integration because of the transport geopolitical conditions of Europe with a direct continent. I know that global partnership is not capable of abolishing wars or crises, but the main task is not abolition, but managing. History testifies that World War I wasn't a war to end all wars, because war remains political and investment issue, influenced by an important capital, time. I would like to quote from Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes: "For war consisted not in battle only, or the act of fighting, but in a tract of time, wherein the real content by battle is sufficiently known. And therefore, the notion of time is to be considered in the nature of war." Thank you very much for this attention.
The question about future of NATO is the question about defense, crisis management, and cooperative security in the European region. That's why, from my point of view, the key point is for ability NATO to adapt due to new challenges is deep re-engineering of partnership industry. I mean that in the short term, we need a new strategic approach. I mean that partners such as Ukraine or Georgia need wide access to the military potential of NATO without membership in NATO, without political obligation from NATO side. I mean the fifth article of Washington Treaty. These help our countries to restore our defense sector. In long term, I think that our countries, Georgia and Ukraine, may to pretend for mentorship, but in perspective of 10 years, at least. Good news that on Wales summit, NATO has demonstrated first steps in this direction. I mean about partnership interoperability initiative, which create platform for using by for example Ukraine possibilities of NATO. But process come very slow, very slow. For example, I don't have any rational argument about why Ukraine has not deliveries of lethal weapons from NATO. And hope to hear this argument in this discussion. Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I really, I got a great pleasure to be here with dear fellow friends as well. To be honest, I'm a little bit in trouble because this topic is a very, very large topic. To talk about NATO's future, it is a very hardcore issue, especially from Hungary. So from a Hungarian perspective, it's almost impossible. So I try to look back for some historical events, some procedures, some long-term issues in NATO's history and also in transatlantic history. And from that perspective, I'm a little bit lucky because I was focusing on this topic in my PhD thesis as well. I found four very important key issues or keywords, and I wrote it up. The first, I think, which is somehow bad news, is that there isn't anything new. Despite the fact that we see many new changes, or at least they seem so that they are new. But in that perspective, that NATO is evolving. NATO as an organization looking for a solution, looking for answers for ongoing challenges. And that's why these results even started from different operational solutions, even seemingly new fields. We can see that from historical perspective, we can't see anything new. In which is new, and this is the second key word, I think, or key element, is the innovation. The innovation capability of NATO is extremely important. And I think that these fields, or these elements of NATO, are extremely important for the ongoing members and for future members as well. Because through these innovation capabilities or innovation possibilities, these nations, even some regions inside of NATO, or some more or less smaller, bigger groups, because there are a couple of them inside of the whole system, can find new ways of thinking, new kind of solutions. The third thing that I would like to say, key element, and I use this term already, the possibilities which exist in the whole system, but in the same time, these possibilities are quite symmetric from one perspective, and at the same time, this is the biggest problem, I think, quite asymmetric. Even in the different operational plans, in the strategic concepts, NATO is bringing all of the time, or many times, these key words, asymmetric warfare, hybrid warfare, and so on and so. But if we use this term, not really from the military perspective, from military terms, then we can see that this asymmetry exists on NATO level, among the states level, the participants level, even inside of different nations, even in Hungary. I would like to explain that the notion, the relation from the political side, from the political elites, from the society, even from experts, is so many asymmetric issues. But at the same time, I don't think that this asymmetry is a bad thing. Somehow it's natural. And if it's natural, then I think that we should use this asymmetry for our own purpose, even in the cases when we are facing very heavy and very tough, or very actual, and very unique challenges. Because from this asymmetry, if you use this in a correct way, you can learn many things, and we can use the got knowledge how to involve new members, how to find new solutions. From Hungarian perspective, and this is my personal opinion, I think Hungary has to be more accurate, or more, Hungary has to focus more how to use these possibilities, even how to explore more smaller or even very small issues in which the Hungarian skills, the Hungarian thinking can be used even on strategic level. Thank you.
Very happy when Christoph mentioned the Islamic State, and I think that the future of NATO, so it is hybrid warfare and all of this mess is very connected, not only with the Islamic State. There is ongoing dissolution of the traditional statehood in the Middle East. So Syria, which is a strategic ally of Russia, is for the time being next to a totally failed country. And we can also see the same situation in Iraq. So Iran is a stable country, but it works not on the Western way, it has its own way. Afghanistan is in reality next to be a failed country, and Pakistan also has an ongoing dissolution program. So it's not only the Islamic State which is very dangerous, but everything that is for the time being happening in the Near and the Middle East, total reshaping of statehood, reshaping of political mentality, from which we were not ready, and the NATO was not ready to understand, and also by being Turkish is also a key feature of this situation. So it's a very ongoing situation which also counts Russia. So for the time being, I can tell that traditional statehood on the Western way ends with the border of the former Soviet Union or the CIC states. So should it happen that NATO is playing the political powers of Central Asia, there can be a kind of domino which can reach Russia, the heart of Russia, in the Ural region. So there is a huge crescent, Islamic crescent, from Karachi to the Persian Gulf until the Ural region also there is a progress. So Russia also should have very close interests with the operations of NATO in this region, and also what happens in this region. Therefore, we also somehow should respect these interests. For it is much more it's also our interests. So sometimes if we are thinking in a strategic way, we should look on Russia not from the West, as we usually used to do, that Russia is a big Eastern beer, always drinking vodka and but on the other hand, we can understand Russia from the South, which is a totally different strategic position. And therefore it's very important that all these political and military issues are connected. So, or getting to be connected. And this is the most important challenge, not only for NATO or not only for Russia, but I can say the traditional world. But there is a very, very ongoing dissolution of this post-colonial statehood everywhere. But let's not speak about Africa, so it's very far and it's not a cup of tea. But we can see the Middle East is very closely connected connected with Eastern Europe and Russia to the Caucasus and also to Central Asia. So I guess this is the most important issue, which is much more important than what is happening for the time being in Donetsk. Of course, Donetsk is also important. We should not forget about Donetsk and the eastern Ukrainian region and about the Crimea and the situation, political situation what is on Crimea, but it's also very interesting. So it's a kind of southern front. So there is a very ongoing change process, and we should follow it. So thank you, Christoph. It was a very, very good question, very, very good and very provocative, but I am very thankful for you. Thank you.
According to geopolitical terms, classical heartland was Central Europe, but in my opinion, heartland shifted to Middle East because of its importance. And I think NATO has to react, and has to react globally, in global dimension.
Okay, you want to say? Yeah. Okay, please.
Thank you for your thesis. I fully agree with you about new threats come from south to the Europe and to the Russia. But I'd like to accent the attention that irrational Russian foreign policy, because we have now a new line of instability from Karabakh, South Ossetia, Abkhazia, Crimea, Donbass, maybe Ukraine, and Russia cut the ties with Western world in situation where new threats to Russia come from south. This is a rational situation. Thank you.
Yes, Middle East is an important place, but the problem is that every time that the Western world engulfs in the Middle East, it doesn't, anything good happen, comes out. We can say from the beginning of when we established Israel till now, every time when Western world does something in Middle East, I mean Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and every of these countries, the threats reappear, but in much bigger scale. So how should NATO and Western world react to the history not repeat?
Yes, I think for Russia, not only the NATO means something, but there are other threats as well. It must be taken into consideration. I think the NATO should revise this aspect. So if somebody has any remark, please.
Thank you very much. I would like to just react maybe provoke, another round of discussion about where is those nerve points, which, as you said, shifted from Central Europe to the Middle East during the course of history. where the two major the two major blocs of power, the West and the East, would collide, and would start a fully fledged war. Now, if we see, we have two world wars, which started in Central Europe. The collision started in Central Europe. And what I see now, and I think it is clear from the case of Georgia, that the West was not willing to start any kind of fully fledged war against Russia, the Russian expansion, or the Russian expansion of the former sphere of interest to the territories, the former territories of the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union, whatever you say. Now, I think that we reached a point historically concerning Ukraine when the West must make a decision if those values on which the whole Western world is established, that the freedom of choice, the freedom of expression, and those values, the four freedom values, which is the fundamental building factor of the European Union as well, and most of the Ukrainian people decided to take on that values, will be supported, and how much will be supported by the Western world. That is at stake, I think, in the case of Ukraine. Now the question is, what measures the West will use in terms of supporting that idea, or leaving the Ukrainians on their own strength and on their own measures to defend that values and that political organization of their nation and their nation state. Now, I think that the answers or the results of the discussion somehow should be aimed and somehow should be, define and analyze that kind of values. In my opinion, and my strong opinion, is that the West should take much stronger measures in terms of defending that decision of the Ukrainian people, and of course, we hope that it will not result in a fully fledged war with Russia, but at least with an agreement, with a compromise that Russia will respect the decision and the political development of the last decade, or the last year, I would say, of Ukraine. And the same rules should apply in terms of the Caucasus as well. If you see these three countries which recently stepped out of the Russian military alliance, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and what is the third one? I don't remember. Armenia, yes. So that's another question, whether the West will leave them on their own strength, defend their independence and their sovereignty, or they will just use different and stronger measures. Thank you.
I may say, which I mentioned, one of the pensioners of our Hungarian foreign minister. I'm a little bit troubled. Let me get a few questions. Did you, Ukrainians, provoke Russia? As far as I know, not. Did you, Polish people, Poland, provoke Russia? You didn't. Did Estonia or anybody else on the northern border of Russia provoke Russia? None of them. None of them. I'm speaking of the last 1 or 2 years, right before the Maidan and during the Maidan events. That period of time. No, none of you. Did Russia provoke any of her neighbors during this period? No. I am not a lawyer and don't want to defend any of you against any of you. But let me point out that, good question again. How could I ask it, put it? Did Putin complain that the 5,000 million what he had paid was for nothing. He didn't got the stuff for it. No. It was Victorian. Did the money, this money, go to Russia or to eastern Ukraine? No, it went to West Ukrainian people, activists collected from there. Am I right? Yes. Did Russian diplomats crowded the Maidan Square as they would doing their weekly shopping there? No, those were Euro-Atlantic diplomats. Did Russia cover the cost of the 8,000 uniform and arms and 600 trucks for ISIS fighters in the very beginning when they didn't drop any weapons, so they had no money? No, it was not Russia, it was Saudi Arabia and another Arabic country. So I'm really troubled. What are we speaking here now? We should speaking about, as the ancient Rome, the classic Rome, they told, cui prodest, who is interested in? That is my final question. Thank you.
I have only a very, very short question that you mentioned Turkey. What do you think? NATO will lose Turkey? Because there are a lot of problems between Ankara and Brussels, for example, the Kurds question, Syria, Israel, and now the main dispute is that Turkey wants to buy and install a Chinese air and missile defense system in the country. And what do you think it will happen? China will buy missiles, and what will be its consequences for Turkey and the NATO relations? Thank you.
Yes, that NATO will not lose Turkey. So NATO is in Washington, not in Brussels. And Washington is still supporting Turkey. It's quite clear. The EU not. So there is a breakup between Turkey and the EU, but not between Turkey and the NATO. Turkey has a key role, and not always a good one, in the events of the Middle East. So we know that Turkish secret services were present, and also Turkish military were present in both Iraq and Syria. And we also know that the Erdogan government had plans to regain the old Ottoman influence in the Eastern Mediterranean. But I guess it is not a reality for the time being, so Turkey is dead end. So I don't believe. Maybe a new alliance between Turkey and Russia should be on the agenda. So what happens with China? So China is too far, and if Turkey and China form an alliance, so two ends of the largest continent. So this can be only a symbolic. They can buy missiles and so on, but in reality, NATO will not let Turkey step out. So even if Turkey wants to step out, NATO will not let. And we clearly know that all the most important armies of the Middle East, so but the Turkish army, the Egyptian, and the even of course Israel, has the closest connections with Washington. And Washington supported the Islamic takeovers in Egypt quite clearly, and was very against of the no military coup d'etat. Also Washington supported, still supports Erdogan, so it's quite clear that Turkey could not step out from NATO. It will be a member of NATO, but Turkey is always the bad boy in us. So Turkish politics love to play into the bad boy class. So we are bad boy, we need compensation, we are the losers and we need compensation. So everything is about money. But the most important that what will happen in the next year in the Turkish election. But I guess for the time being it's not of our cup of tea. I'm not sure that the governing party will stay in government after the next election, but let's see. So I'm not married who can foretell the future of the King Arthur. So that's all.
Please. May I comment the Ukrainian point about the Western strategy to solve the Ukrainian crisis? Indeed, we have two crises in Ukraine. First, hot crisis on Donbass, and second crisis is annexation of Crimea. Sometimes Western politicians, as well Russian leaders, try to lose Crimea question from their agenda, but Ukraine not. From my point of view now, Ukraine needed membership in NATO, but need help in for restoring our military capacity. And this way, one of the way of resolving Donbass crisis. But Crimea crisis, from my point of view, will be resolved only in political way. I accept in political way only in connection with Ukraine membership in NATO. And the third point, the communication, close communication between Turkey and Russia is possible because Western politicians try to lose Crimea agenda in his Crimea question in the agenda, because the Crimea question had to send problem in relation to Turkey and Russia, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we can go ahead. The United States and even the NATO aims to deal with the crisis in Ukraine and the general resurgence of Russian military capabilities. US forces has approximately 50 armored vehicles pre-deployed in the Baltic states, Poland, and in the future, as we heard, another 100 military vehicles will be deployed to Germany, possibly to Baltics, Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria. So my question is, can these deployments illustrate a qualitative shift to begin about some months ago as Russia adopted a more aggressive posture in Eastern Ukraine or not? We need more military hardware in Eastern Europe. And the second part of the question is whether, how is it in line with the current economic crisis in Europe, mainly in Eastern Europe? Please, if you have any remarks, please.
I believe that NATO had to react to the events which took part in the eastern part of Europe, in Ukraine. One of the reactions were common exercises between Poland and Baltic seas, where the British and you were saying, thanks to the parting exercises, another one of the most symbolic events to reassure that for NATO, Eastern Front is important is the redeployment of the force. It has many aims, many goals. One of them is reassurance that NATO cares. Second one is keeping calm our countries from Baltic Sea, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria. And about economic crisis. It's hard to me to speak about it because economic crisis didn't affect my country as much as other countries like Hungary, as Baltic states, as Western countries. But we believe that this move is an investment in security. It's something that we need. It's something that we were fighting for a lot of years. We were fighting to be independent country, and we were fighting to join NATO. So, as a country which is one of not so many in NATO, which had almost the required 2% of GDP on arms, I can say this is not a matter that needs it should be concerned security.
Thank you. Anybody else is something else?
Short comment. I think that defense industry, for example, may be a locomotive for economic growth, not only for economic decline. That's why investment in this sector may come to the positive afterwards.
I would like to add to this basic deployment issues with one sentence, just a really interesting example. In the middle of the Cold War, when some Western European countries, they were heavily criticized by USA that why don't you raise your budget, this budget sharing issues, why don't you use more weapons, why don't you build up your strategies. One of the Western European politicians said as an answer that, hey guys, the problem is that the first Soviet tank division is just 1,500 kilometers away. I would like to explain this example that when there is some build-up, some capability build-up, military forces are in the region, and also we need to see this whole issue from other kind of messages and from other kind of aspects as well. So when we are using or NATO is deploying or USA deploying forces, then we need to be very, very careful on this whole issue because from one side we are creating or having a minor problem because usually deployments are problems, may I say. But in the second time, at the end, this whole issue we will find a much bigger issue. The second related problem, I think, to this whole question, the cooperation. And not just in military terms, but also in political terms. And when we have had some reactions here from you already, I think NATO's biggest problem, but somehow its nature also from the whole organization perspective, that in the same time we are talking about senses, political approach, and in the same time we are talking about very rational issues, militarism. And to understand the whole situation, sometimes we have to shift from senses to very rational thinking and back and forth. So that's why I think that in the Ukrainian case even, or in the ongoing challenges, even in deployment issues, we need to take these two elements very deeply into consideration. The security and economic crisis, even assistance issues. I think, let's talk about from a little bit economical perspective. And we have three terms when we are creating such kind of assists. Even assists can be very, very wide. And we know this, I think, in this room, everybody knows this. But there are three very important elements: the quantity, quality, and the price. And what we see based on the ongoing issues when we have assisted or we got some assist, we were offering assist, that among these three factors, usually two of them are working very well. The third one is missing, or the third one has got some problems. And this is the case, I think, all of the time in such kind of support and such kind of assist, that how can we create a real balanced system among these elements. Of course, there are political aspects, of course, there are strategic aspects, but basically I think these are the very important core elements when we are getting or sending even tools, even techniques to other countries. And finally, 60s, 70s, in all these circles, there isn't anything new about it. There is money. There is money, or there are a lot of money if it's really needed. So security goes beyond on economic crisis. And if there are real political and if there are real threats, I'm not so convinced that these threats are in all kinds of aspects
Many countries, but mainly the Baltic countries are threatened by Russia, and as we heard, in Belarus is scheduled a new Air Force base which will be operational 2016. Do you think that the threat of the Baltic states is serious or not?
I don't believe that there will be war. It's not in the interest of the Euro as common. I'm talking now about Russia, Poland, Germany, France, Baltic states. I believe that no one wants war. But we must understand the perspective of Baltic states. They are very young countries, they are small countries, they don't have big capabilities of defense, and they are neighbors of a country which is, let's say, a lot bigger, with a lot of more population, more rich, which is behaving very with big aggression. So I'm not surprised that the Baltic states are feeling threatened, and they are putting their hopes in their official document in the NATO and the European Union. That is one of the points that why they joined these two organizations. Thank you.
The political regime of Lukashenko is the political regime of peaceful time. That's why if Russia starts something similar as in Donbass in Baltic region, this I think will mean the end of the regime of Lukashenko. That's why I consider that Lukashenko will try to do all for ignore Russian aggressive policy. I may say that, for example, Lukashenko doesn't recognize Crimea annexation. Lukashenko didn't join to the sanction against Ukraine, Russian sanction against Ukraine in case of association with you. That's why Belarus now is not line of instability.
Answering such kind of build-ups, I think, let's recall Sun Tzu. He said, he wrote in his work that what is the real meaning of a sword which is hanging on your wall? And we used to use thinkers and researchers to think on this sentence, what is the real meaning? Especially in the terms when a state has got full range of capabilities, from A to Z, from conventional warfare capabilities until nuclear warfare capabilities. I think it's somehow it's natural, and I'm not just talking about Russia, I'm talking about United States, even in China, that time by time these states are using, or they have the internal feeling, or internal has to do feeling, that let's show what we do have, let us use what we're really able to use. Of course, when you are putting military power, military deployment, military stations to other countries, it's a message as well. But in the same time, and it will be a threatening in the terms of senses. But in the same time, when you see the other elements of the other parties, in this case the Baltic states, I think they can use this coalition as an opportunity to build up their own forces, to use this as an argument how to strengthen their own position even inside of NATO. So from one side, it's of course can be a message, but from the other side, it's a very, very important possibility for all of the participants, all of the Dutch partners.
For more than 2 decades, NATO has tried to build partnership with Russia, including different mechanisms in the NATO-Russia Council. NATO realized that the conditions for that relationship do not currently exist. As a result, NATO's decision to suspend all practical civilian and military cooperation between NATO and Russia remains in place. Do you think this is a correct policy from the NATO?
As I said, from strategic point of view, NATO, Ukraine and Russia have to resolve new threats from south, as we said. And we need communication with Russia. I think there is a necessity communication between NATO and Russia. But, I repeat, the irrational foreign policy of Russia cannot to produce this communication platform. I think that the essence of current crisis is that Russia, being a regional power, try to act as global power. That's why this illusion creates a problem and for West and for Russia and of course for Ukraine. Eurasia. This is Eastern Europe, Urals and East Far East.
But it's not global,
but this is the question.
But big part of all.
Always complicated. I just want to mention something about, talk about a little bit the past of my active career. In 94, I think it was in November, I was in Washington, D.C. And visiting several, think tanks. Let it be pro-Republican, pro-Democrat, and also we visited, and I myself visited Congress Library. Believe me, this is a very intellectual place. There are a lot of well-educated and very intelligent people working for the Congress, and they have access to all the confidential sources, by the way, but they are not allowed to publish. But we had excellent books over there. So whenever I was, and we had discussions, the Americans always, they were talking about Russia as a natural ally vis-a-vis China. Believe me, that was a common point, that China is raising, and China is the real problem for the world, because China is a rising new global power, and there are, a lot of other things. I don't want to get into details. So they were talking, the Americans were talking about, in general terms, that Russia is our ally because there is China. And why? And plus Russia, if Russia has a problem, it is China. Because there is Siberia, they are getting into Siberia. They say historically it was their part, especially Eastern Siberia, and there are raw materials and so on. So, and something went wrong. if that point, because the present situation is absolutely different. And frankly, I don't know the answers. Who to blame? To blame the Americans, to blame the Russians, to blame the Europe, or whatever. So, and I'm sure that in the long run, there will be a problem somewhere in the East. And then what will be the role of NATO? What will be the role of NATO in Asia? So that's a future question for me and for maybe for all of us. Thank you very much.
I would like to just have some remarks about Russia. You mentioned, Mr. Goldman, that Russia is a regional power. I think the best is there's some kind of misunderstanding, because Russia, in military terms, nuclear strategic power, is a global power. In the conventional armed forces, could be a regional. If you compare Russian armed forces with Chinese, Russian armed forces, active forces, it's approximately 700,000, 800,000, not more, even less. China has twice as more. United States also over 1 million. So in this respect, Russia is a regional power, if you want. But if we talk about the Russian-Ukrainian problems, no matter what Ukraine will get from help from the West, I mean, military hardware, technology, whatever, Ukraine will not be a match for Russia, militarily. So I would like to express my views that the only way for Ukraine is to try to come to terms with Russia. There's no other way. And the second question is also attached to this one, that the Ukraine, the highest Ukrainian power now, the Verkhovna Rada, you have a new highest level body. My question would be, are they willing to change this policy? I mean, this policy, this kind of opinion to be more belligerent vis-a-vis Russia, or to find a compromise. Because yesterday, I don't know if you were here yesterday, there was a British guy, Paul, I don't know if his name, from the NATO review. Okay, thanks. So he said very interesting things. He said that, okay, Maidan is waiting, and if the new Verkhovna Rada will not fulfill the hope of Maidan and the Ukrainian people, they will come out against. So my question would be to you, Mr. Golfo, what's the composition of the new Verkhovna Rada? Are they, as the former one, are they in the pockets of oligarchs, or they represent the Maidan? Thank you.
Thank you. For political negotiation in Russia, our position very simple. Crimea and Donbass is Ukrainian territories. But Russia ready for this point? No. That's why with this theoretical question about military, political, our points are clear. About the second. I start with the opinion of Ukrainian citizens. According to sociological polls, we have now 45 or 50% of supporting NATO membership of Ukraine. Now, we're ready for referendum, but without inhabitants of Crimea and separatist Donbass. That's why during negotiation about coalition, there was hard discussion. What political elite can do in this situation. discussion when Ukraine become, not become, ask NATO for membership. Coalition majority in parliament said now, yesterday, before yesterday, but Poroshenko said, but NATO doesn't ready for Ukrainian membership. That's why let's to spend the deadline 2020. Now we have some gap between inhabitants and citizens and parliament, because there are many, from one side, there are many activists of Maidan in parliament, there are many volunteers, there are many combat commanders, but also there are many oligarchs groups. Yesterday we have a new government. According indirect features, I think that this government may be a government of reforms. But the question is, corruption is very bad, but reforms for citizens is also very bad. That's why I think the spring will be a point for development of situation in the mid-term outlook in 2 points. This is loyalty of citizens to new government and Poroshenko vice president. And second point, this is a new wave of Russian aggression on the eastern part.
Thank you. Decision of Kremlin people is a Russian territory. Donbass, it's an internal problem of Ukraine. It's not occupied territory. And another question. If you want to enter European Union and NATO, who will pay for it? We don't want to pay for your entry to NATO. But if I'm not mistaken, European Union and NATO are not ready to pay.
About second question, your military deliverance in Donbass. About Crimea, this was fake. This was fake referendum. Thank you.
97% is fake.
You have good accountants.
Like you.
Okay, Joseph, please. I think we cannot resolve this problem in a short time. Please.
But I like that debate.
Another question, who will pay? Excuse me.
Basically what's happening in the Crimean situation is that basically it's a preemptive action. Because Russia was preempting that the people there wants to go to Russia. And the funny or tragicomical situation is that this preemptivity was shown by Western countries, by USA. And basically what you did, you used this thinking. You preempted that those people who are living in Crimea they want to join you. And before it was legal, you acted.
It's historical, a Russian territory.
Is it true, sir? Technically, of course.
It's important. Yeah, it's important from Russia, but of course Russia must participate in this conference.
Well, I have good news. I have first trust for Ukraine and the Euro-Atlantic and European integration. About historical precedents. If we use your principle, your criteria, let's propose Mongolia to return Moscow and area around Moscow to the gold portal. History is a very interesting instrument. That's why please be gentlemen in this review with history. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to refer to the gentleman's remark because I think that's a very important one. And I think this issue is who pays the integration of Ukraine to the Western Bloc, if it happens, is the critical issue now. And I think that basically is not answered yet, first. And the second thing is that it also reflects the controversy of the whole Western world, you know, in terms of the Ukrainian crisis. Because politically they support Ukraine, but if we come to the economic analysis of the country, and if you consider the other East European countries or Central European countries, which economies after 10 years of EU accession and 25 years after the communist regime collapsed, you know, still lagging behind the Western part, even to the Mediterranean Western part. First, and the second thing is that there is not even any kind of comprehensive economic strategy, neither in the countries nor in the bigger member states like Germany, France, or the UK, or in the center of the EU in Brussels, how to make the economic convergence, which was the basic idea of the accession of these countries. Now, if we go to the case of Ukraine, I think, in my opinion, there is a certain level of naivety in the Ukrainian leadership, no matter if I support, you know, the political willingness of joining the Western world, but in terms of who pays the bill, you know, the question is not answered, and what I see now, this question is not asked by the Ukrainian leadership, and not pursued by the Ukrainian leadership towards Washington or Brussels, because that's the final question. I think that the gentleman was quite right, you know, in the terms of if we want to success from Russia and from the Russian economic or political sphere of interest, and we want to join to the Western world, then we cannot expect Russia to pay the bill, you know, and that's the basic issue. And I think that the fundamental questions the Ukrainian leadership should pursue and ask from the West, from Berlin, from Brussels, and from Washington, is that the costs of the economic inclusion should be tackled. Thank you.
That's why my forecast that question of European and Euro-Atlantic membership of Ukraine is 10 decade, not tomorrow, not for 5 years, decade. And in decade, EU will transform, and NATO will transform. That's why this is a theoretical question. This is a politician question now, maybe a PR question.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other remarks? Do you think the future open door policy, so is the enlargement of NATO possible, and in which direction? East or south? What do you think about this? It's a very good question, but that's why we are here. If we read the communique, the final communique is written, the doors are open. So what does it mean? Nobody was invited events, if I remember well. What will be in the future? Please.
I consider that enlargement of NATO will be connected with the result of Ukrainian crisis resolution. If we have new South Ossetia and Donbass and Crimea will stay in Russia, I think that new, for example, membership of Georgia is important.
South Ossetia is not Russia, it's an independent state.
Three remarks, I think, on this issue. I mean, practically, doors will be open in many ways. Fully open. But this is not the question. The question is that how can you get through? How can you get in? And from one perspective, NATO built up really good working measures, step by step, how to reach the door, how to get in. It's worked in more cases now. In these cases, because there are not just one, there are others, a couple of them, I think that we are struggling to think about at least one thing, basically the virtuality of these aspects. And from thinking or from philosophical viewpoints, we used to say that virtuality, or if something is virtual, it means that it is actual, but somehow unreal or unrealistic. And I think that these issues are quite actual ones, but some elements at least, or even the whole structure is unrealistic or unreal. And these unreal elements are opening the biggest problem, I think, for all partners or all players, not just for NATO, not just for NATO members, but even for somehow for Russia or other cooperating partners as well. How to fix these elements? How many unreal elements are there, or maybe are they real, or what are the aspects or the visions related to these issues? I think these are the core issues that. So I think answering with one sentence, I think virtually yes, technically no.
And please do not forget, there is not only Georgia or Ukraine, there is Bosnia and Herzegovina, there is Macedonia, Montenegro, join NATO. So please, thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe because of my age I'm talking too much, but I just wanted to refer the history of Hungary's joining NATO and European Union. At the time, I was an active civil servant in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I would say that there were talks about what is easier, to join NATO or easier to join the European Union. And there were quite a lot of people, even in Hungary, that said that joining NATO is easy. We issue a new order, a new command, and the army will go down to, let's say, to the west, to the east, and that's it. And then that's the memory. I'm simplifying thing. But joining the European Union is a very, very complicated issue, because it means that we have to be integrated as a market economy with all the legal and other structural aspects of it. So I think when we were talking about that, from the Russian side, that they were talking about that maybe Ukraine should be a member of the European Union, no problem. But the problem is the membership of NATO. I would say that maybe it's politically it's not a problem, but otherwise technically and all other aspects, it's a huge problem to join the European Union. And as the gentleman just was talking about that, we are still not yet fully integrated into the European Union, although we are a member in the Union. So please think about that issue or problem. Thank you.
The European Union is another topic, please.
Thank you very much, Public Administration University, Claudia Kecsimenti-Sipos. I would like to remind you one thing, which is written in the Bucharest Summit Declaration 2008, 23rd point. It says that Ukraine and Georgia, once upon a time, they are going to join NATO. They are going to be NATO members. That's first. It promises a promise. The article does not stipulate what is the exact time and term when they join. Secondly, coming back to open door policy. Article 10 is about open door policy, but with two stipulations. One is that NATO may invite countries. What kind of countries? European countries. And if you read carefully Article 6, in that article the geographical boundaries are clear-cutly described, which belongs to the Euro-Atlantic area, geographically. Second point is that they should contribute to the Euro-Atlantic security issues. They should contribute. And my final point is, I read an article about partner number 1 country, which is Sweden. So I would like to add that maybe it is not going to be Eastern country, Eastern European, maybe it is not going to be Southern country, but it's going to be maybe Sweden, Western 5, or like-minded country, which can be our next ally. Thank you.
As I'm being a diplomat, I can afford myself to be cynic and speak frankly. So open door policy means that the doors are open, but at least don't want to enter. That's all.
Thank you much for your participation. We highly appreciate it, especially the young guys. And we wish you a lot of success in your political life as well. If there is no question, this panel is finished. I give the floor to our Director International to close the whole conference. Please, Frank. Thank you. Big Frank.
Well, my name is Ferenc, but in English, of course, you can say Frank, so I should have give you a final or some assessment of our conference, Frank assessment. Okay. Well, as me being a member of the board, what I can say, it was a success. If I'd been more self-critical, maybe I may find some critical remarks, but also I would say, honestly, that I think it was a success from different points. And first of all, we were very pleasantly surprised with the number of attendants yesterday. Of course, today is, we have less participants than yesterday, but yesterday really was a very wide participation. And also we had, I think, thank to, I would say, she's behind. So she is very modest, but she's my boss, and I think that she was the engine. She was the engine of behind our center and behind the organization of this conference, and also fighting to get good lecturers and also to get the money from Brussels, because it was well, actually it was an important actually factor to organize such a conference. And finally, we had to postpone the conference. We were planning it earlier, but then we got the money, but we had not yet the contract. So I would say that when we are talking about joining NATO or European Union, please have in mind that it's a fantastic bureaucracy and fantastic administration, and so many papers we have to sign, and they scrutinize every little bill. So their auditing is terrible. So we must be very careful about organizing. How do we? But it was okay. And really thanks to the NATO Public Diplomacy Division for that. So we had nice lecturers, we had different views, and I may say that we were very informed about the details and even about the global issues as well. So we had even a look outside from the European area too. And also I would say that I'm very happy that we organized this roundtable. We should do it more often. And because if the circle is smaller and we don't have a big table with high dignitaries speaking, it's difficult to have a real conversation. But today we had a real, more or less a real conversation. And also I'm happy that we have young people around with fresh ideas and looking ahead. Although we may have more experience, but they have more, it's not only fresh ideas, but maybe brave ideas how to do the future, how to influence the future. And I would say that also there were, we were specifically happy to have István Gyarmati, because we know perfectly well his usual views, and we started the meeting with all his provocative remarks and provocative ideas. Frankly, unfortunately, he's not around today, but for me, it was not new, because I had heard several times. But I'm sorry, I regret that his provocative remarks were not reflected, because we go on that line, because he was critical vis-à-vis NATO, vis-à-vis America, vis-à-vis Russia, and what he said, frankly, about China. And China is the partner which is now in a very comfortable position to watch the world what is going on in Europe and all over. So that was for me, and I hope that for you as well. It was an exciting exercise, an exciting event, and finally I would thank all the participants and even the technical staff. And we regret really that we could not have interpretation. Maybe if we could have afforded, because we have, I mean, our funds are really modest, maybe we could have more people around. Some people may thought that if it is in English, we cannot come and participate actively. And that's the final remark that really, unfortunately, civil organizations like ours are not well funded, I would say. So our budget is really small, hoping that in the future it will be better. And also, we are hoping that in the future, like in many countries, so-called think tanks will have a bigger role in formulating the decisions accepted by the political leaders. So, thank you again. I wish you, on behalf of our center, maybe it's too early, but Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. I would say that I must be careful about Christmas. I have been in Los Angeles where they were very careful. Like in our communist times, we were talking not about Santa Claus or something like that. So, but still, I think that we can wish you a Merry Christmas.